All right, everybody, let's get started. Thank you for jumping on the webinar today. We're really excited to talk with you today. Thank you for being here. We know December is a very busy month, and so we're grateful for you taking the time to join us. The title of today's presentation is the 2024 Nurse Workforce and Staffing Top Tips. We're going to share some original data with you and provide context to that data. These come from a couple of different surveys and studies that have been conducted. And we're excited to share these data points and the implications for these data points for 2024 and for your staffing. So our speaker today, the one who will be providing expert context, is our CEO. Aman, why don't you introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Iman Abuzaid. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Incredible Health. I'm an MD by background. I've been in technology for the last 10 years of my career, and we started working on Incredible Health about 6 years ago.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so here's our agenda today that we're going to talk through. We're going to provide just a little context about the nurse labor market today, what we're seeing, and a little bit about who we are, so you have a little bit of context on Incredible Health, which I think important as we move through the presentation. We're then going to provide a big announcement and some tips from our study results, and then we'll dive into Q&A. And one thing I'll say on Q&A, as we get moving, just type those into the Q&A or the chat area, and we'll address those as we go. We'll, of course, address anything we haven't gotten to at the end, but if you want to address things as we go, we'll do that. So please go to the Q&A in the chat and address questions to us as we go throughout the presentation today. It'll keep things moving, keep things interesting. Okay.
Awesome. One
go
thing
ahead.
before you dive in, McKay, I just wanted to sort of mention why we do these.
Yeah.
Incredible Health, we're a software company, and we operate nationally. We have over 800,000 nurses on our platform and over 800 hospitals as well. And we're a software company that where hospitals use our custom matching technology to hire nurses in permanent roles. So one of the benefits of being a software-enabled two-sided career marketplace is that we had access to enormous data sets in our actual databases in our network because of the huge presence of hospitals and nurses on our platform. And then we're also in a unique position to be able to study this market from many different angles. We can do surveys at large scale, and we can also look at quantitative data in our network on a consistent basis as well. We also the mission of the company is to help healthcare professionals live better lives and help them find and do their best work. So we do see it as our, part of our responsibility of being part of this industry is to share these insights, information, data to help healthcare leaders across the country continue to evolve their strategy and their tactics.
Yeah, that's a great intro. I think the key there is we do feel like it's our responsibility to share data with you as we get it from other hospital executives and nurses, and that's part of our goal today. And then as we kind of talk a little bit more about who Incredible Health is and why we exist. Look, we all know the healthcare employment situation that you're seeing on the screen there, right? Healthcare has been the #1 employment sector for a long time now, moving on 6 years. But yet as the demand for healthcare workers has gone up, we've seen significant shortages, specifically in nursing, and that's caused major problems. It's a national problem that's getting worse. You're seeing it be discussed at the federal level, at different state levels of government, recognizing that it's a problem. There's estimates that we'll be 1 million nurses short by 2030. And then the stat that I think is so compelling and that we see all the time really impact hospitals and health systems is that far right data point. 95 days is the average time to hire a permanent specialized nurse. One of the substantial benefits of Incredible Health is that you can do that under 20 days. And in some markets, we're seeing 14 days, 15 days. So we really speed up and help you speed up that hiring process for permanent full-time nurses. And on anything that jumps out to you from this slide or anything you want to highlight, and did you think when you founded the company that speed was going to be a huge, the impact of Incredible Health was going to be hiring more quickly in addition to all the other benefits?
Yeah, I mean, just on this slide, I think our many of the audience is sort of living this day to day. The patient demand just continues to increase, right? And even though the number of healthcare workers has absolutely increased in the last 10 years, it just hasn't been enough to meet that demand. And yes, and so we're suffering some from a whole range of consequences as a result of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Okay, we did want to highlight this announcement. So today, this webinar happened to be the same day as we announced some major feature and product updates for Incredible Health. And so I did want to just highlight this before we jump into some of the data.
Sure,
So
I'm happy to walk through some of these.
yeah, go ahead. I think this is so cool, and it just happens to be with the press release went out, what, like 3 hours ago. So the timing's great.
Yeah, so you know, many of us are aware of generative AI, and you know, it's increasing popularity and use, not just in consumer applications, but also in business. And so we really embrace this technology, and we've sort of implemented generative AI in a few different aspects of our platform. There's probably three areas in particular that we want to just very briefly highlight today. First is just like the resume wizard. 30% of nurses, they start their job search without a resume. And that's for a variety of reasons. It could be socioeconomic reasons, like they don't have access to a computer or a laptop. It could be it's a awareness or education issue where they don't know what a good resume should look like. Could also be time, you know, just not having the time to, you know, sit down and focus and create an awesome resume. And so we really added this resume wizard inside our mobile app. And as a result, the impact of it is that it enables nurses to generate resume in minutes. And then it brings another 30% of the workforce, right, of the nursing workforce into the job search process. You're largely restricted from the job search process when you don't have a resume, and certainly when you don't have a good resume. So we really are trying to just expand opportunity here and increase the amount of talent that the hospitals that we work with can access. The second area is sort of like the custom outreach to nurses that uses AI. Um, you know, when hospitals are really competing quite intensely against each other for the talent. There's many hyper competitive markets across the country in many cities in the U.S. And so this feature just enables hospitals to automatically, instantly send very personalized messages to talent, to nurses. It really can highlight in a personalized way the perks, the benefits, all the unique attributes of a hospital inside that SMS or inside that email, and it can be done at scale. And so the result of that is that 20% of more than 20%, there's been an increase of 20% of nurses accepting interview requests from hospitals. And so this is really helping each hospital differentiate itself from its competition in an instant. And then finally, just the processing of resumes. You know, at Incredible Health, we do have to do quite a bit of screening, matching, and processing with talent that joins our platform. And specifically in the area of verifying skills and specialties, we've been able to use AI to just bring that down from days to just minutes, which means the nurses are in front of hospitals a lot faster. And so, yeah, those are the three features we wanted to kind of just mention today.
Great. Thanks for going through those. Okay, we're going to divide this up into a couple of sections. The first are some data and tips from hospital executives. This is from data we gathered from hospital executives earlier in 2023, as well as some best practices that we've gathered as we've done multiple webinars and had a lot of discussions with hospital executives. And kind of like Amanda mentioned earlier, we feel like one of our responsibilities as we talk with you is to share insights. So we're excited to share some of those. So ask any questions along the way, and we'll walk through these slides together. As mentioned, this was the large portion of this data was from 100-ish hospital executives, senior executives, VP and above, gathered in the summer of 2023. Okay. First thing we talked about is, and this is kind of reiterating something we just mentioned, but the nursing shortage is being described as critical by 94% of health system executives, which obviously highlights the need for urgent and effective strategies. This is a number that, I don't think we're surprised to see A large number of health system executives described this situation as critical, but I was surprised to see it at 94% still in 2023, 3 years removed from COVID, when this problem sort of became like front page news. Any thoughts on this, slide, Amon, in terms of the number of healthcare executives who still say this is a huge issue?
Yeah, I think, look, ultimately that this is 94% is essentially all of them, right? There is a silver lining here. It means that because of the severity of this of the challenge of the nurse shortage, it means that the amount of investment, resourcing, focus, prioritization that goes into the topic of nurse hiring and nurse retention is continues. And that is an opportunity for organizations and for nurses as well to really sort of improve how things are done. There wasn't much change, or there weren't a ton of changes, right, before COVID, or the changes were happening slower. And so this emphasis really accelerated a lot of the strategic thinking, the implementation, and the changes that many organizations have put in place related to nurse hiring and nurse retention.
Awesome. And then experience and tenure was a topic that I think got a lot of attention in 2023 as well. So I won't go through each of these statistics, but I did want to highlight the bottom two, which is, previous experience is the most common thing, of course, hospitals are saying they're looking for. And then 53% of nurses at their institutions have an average tenure of less than 5 years. So it's a relatively inexperienced workforce at many hospitals, which I don't think is surprising, but also leads to, different challenges than if you had a super experienced workforce. And we've talked about this a ton, but are there things with experience and tenure, like trends that we're seeing, or things that jump out to you from this slide, Amon?
I think the continued focus, or the shift that has happened around the average age of nurses and the tenure of them is significant. And so increasingly, we're seeing more and more hospitals fill their units with new graduate nurses. And that has some important implications on quality, on safety, on the need for more educators. And it does put, different strain on the units. We have also seen it increase the need for experienced nurses in order to support this larger cohort of new graduate or newer, or less experienced nurses. And then the final sort of implication and consequence of this is that the competition for new graduate nurses has increased. I think before COVID, many hospital teams, and certainly to some extent Incredible Health as well, just took the new graduate cohort a little bit for granted. Like, hey, they're always going to be there. It's always easy to fill the new graduate programs and so on. That has changed, right? And now that many hospitals have changed their strategies to fill their units with new graduate nurses, now there's a shortage of new graduate nurses. And so another consequence that has happened is for medical surgical units. For med-surg units, which historically have been a place where new graduates get hired into, are now becoming increasingly understaffed because new graduate nurses are being hired directly into specialty areas like L&D and ICU and OR and so on. So it really is sort of changing. When you break this into cohorts, it is changing the competitive dynamics of the different generations of nurses.
Yeah, and that is an interesting sort of phenomenon that leads into we labeled this slide misalignment, which may not properly explain what we're talking about, but I do think it's an interesting way to put it. So health systems say that 80% of those younger nurses that you were just talking about are requesting more flexible scheduling. And health systems are aware of this, right? Health systems know they're requesting this, but only about 11% say that they actually offer flexible schedules. And there's a lot of ways to define flexible, right? But there does seem to be some misalignment in terms of particularly what that younger generation of nurses is seeking versus in many cases what at least the people who answered this survey say that they're actively doing right now. Does that square with because you talk to so many of these health system executives, Does that square with what you're seeing, that there's kind of a struggle to figure out how to serve that younger generation with flexible scheduling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like this, the health systems are aware that, the desire of flexible scheduling is there. However, look, it's just operationally challenging to
Yeah,
implement.
it's tough.
It is tough, right? So, uh, flexible scheduling first is just, defining that can mean self-scheduling. That can mean, hey, I want a range of shifts. Like, I don't want just a 12-hour shifts. I want to consider 8 hours, 4 hours. It's a consideration of part-time roles versus full-time roles. And the truth is, even among the entire nurse workforce, there's they have different definitions and asks for flexible scheduling. And so that essentially creates an environment where it's very challenging operationally to implement that. The nursing leaders, to some extent, the HR leaders as well, have to accommodate would have to accommodate so many different preferences, and and that's just tough to do. And so that I think the struggle is in the implementation, the operational implementation of this, which is why we are not seeing faster progress here. However, it is what the talent wants, and so we are
Yeah,
seeing that health systems that are figuring it out and implementing sort of these tactics are able to not only hire more, but able to retain more nurses too.
that's great. Great point. It's hard in these situations. It's challenging when the solutions, which is flexible scheduling, can create so many logistical difficulties, right? It makes the challenge even more difficult. There's a really interesting question that I want to bring up in the chat that just came in. It's very difficult to get new nurses, new grads trained. What are, different health systems doing to train new graduates and sort of bridge that gap to the younger generation of nurses? As you talk to hospital executives, man, what are you seeing with, how they're implementing training with new graduate nurses? Like, what are they doing that's effective and trying to do that maybe they haven't tried before?
Yeah, I think in this area we've seen a whole range of tactics that work for a variety of health systems. The number one is ensuring that there is sort of a percent of the unit that is still experienced.
Mm,
And so it's uh, of course inappropriate for 100% of the unit to be 100% new graduates, right? And so there needs to be a minimum percent per unit that is experienced nurses, because so they're there to just at least be, even if they're not fully training, they're at least there for mentorship, oversight, so on. The second area that we've done is partnerships with, increasing the educators and preceptors, and increasing that number at the hospital, as well as increasing the wages of the preceptors and educators, um, to a point where it is appealing for an experienced nurse
mm,
to work as an educator. The third area we've seen is just sort of more formal programming around this. What we mean by that is new graduate development programs, new graduate also nurse residency programs. By formalizing it, that means that there's an actual formal program and resources and in place, and a schedule in place in order to progressively orient and train that new graduate nurse. And then finally, we've seen partnerships with nursing schools. And what I mean by that specifically is that increasing use of what they call externships, where, hey, it's appropriate for have a new graduate nurse, have a nurse who's not a nursing student, who's not yet fully trained, start to get exposure to the hospital, to more make up for some of the deficits that can happen in school of not being exposed to enough clinical training.
that's great. Awesome. You mentioned wages, salaries, and bonuses. So sign-on bonuses continue to be the primary method to attract nurses. 35% of hospital executives say they use them. And then 26% of hospital execs say they're increasing their salaries. One of, I think, the predictions that you shared for 2024 is you kind of expect this wage pressure to continue. Is that a fair way to state what you're kind of expecting in 2024, just with the shortage, this wage pressure continues to go up?
Yeah, we absolutely are expecting wage inflation to continue. It might continue at a little bit slower pace compared to the last 3 years, but it will continue. And part of that is just, it's just it's just macroeconomic supply versus demand, right? And so in any industry, if there is a shortage of labor, wages increase, and that trend will continue. As far as the specific tactics that are being used, sign-on bonuses are sort of an easier tactic to use because they're one time, right? They don't require an enormous amount of approvals, like actually increasing the underlying hourly rate. We're also seeing more and more use of retention bonuses.
Mm.
So hey, you get a bonus, but you're not going to get it as soon as you start. You can get it year 1, year 2, so on. So to really incentivize not just hiring, but also the retention of the nurse.
Love that. And then this is one that we should spend a second on, the generational chasm, we're calling it. We kind of addressed this in passing, but most system execs, or 35%, I should say, health system execs say there's conflicts based on generation. And there's some like very specific ways that those manifest. So 78% of younger nurses are requesting salary increases faster and sooner. They're requesting and seeking specialized roles faster, and they want faster and more immediate career advancement at a much higher rate, and seem to be less patient, might be the way to say it, as they move through the system. This is something that I think is not going to get less dramatic. I would think that as hospitals have to turn to new graduates even more, that it becomes a even more pronounced problem. But are there any statistics on this slide that jump out to you as stuff that you're hearing as you talk to hospital execs?
Yep. I think the challenge that we all have is that there's 5 generations of nurses in the workforce right now. And each and every generation, from Gen Z all the way to the boomers, they're all actively working right now. And each one of those generations has different preferences, expectations, so on. And so that's complicated, right? To put in place policy strategies that address the needs of all 5 generations. I will say that some of these trends that are mentioned here are not actually unique to just to nursing and healthcare. They are happening across many industries. So, for example, the Gen Z generation,
and technology and everything.
we cope with it here at work as well, and we're a technology company. So, the Gen Z generation is a generation that is quite ambitious and also quite impatient. What that means is their desire for salary improvements, their desire to move up in their organization and to get more and more opportunities is much more intense than some of the older generations. And we are absolutely seeing that play out here in a variety of ways. Like Gen Z nurses graduating today don't want to go into med surg, right? They don't want to pay their dues in a certain units and so on. They want to go straight into specializing. And so because of the other factor that's going on here is the intense competition for the talent. And so to a large extent, there are a group of hospitals that are accommodating some of these asks. At the end of the day, within a few years, the Gen Z, even today, the Gen Z and millennial generations are the majority of the nursing workforce. So increasingly, we're going to have to more and more cater to what it is that they're asking for.
Yeah. And that can be frustrating at times, as we've heard, but not something that's going away. Okay, travel nurses, a huge topic. Seems like it's actually becoming, it's still an important topic, but it seems like it's becoming less of a topic recently. 96% of health system execs say they plan to prioritize permanent nurse staff over temporary staff. And then most hospitals did not increase the number of travel nurses compared to last year. I think what we're seeing, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong here, but it feels like we're seeing hospitals recognize that permanent nurses are the right approach, if at all possible, going forward for them. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the reason for that is twofold. One is financial, and one is just cultural inequality too. Let's talk about the financial piece first. Travel nurses throughout COVID had rates that were 3 to 4 times higher than the permanent nurses. And that is, hospitals are low margin businesses, and that puts enormous strain on a hospital's financials when wages are that high. And so there's been a concerted effort by almost every single hospital to continue to reduce the use of travel nurses or premium labor. Even in 2023, where travel nurse wages did come down, they are still, 1.5 to 2 times more than a permanent nurse. And so that pressure to continue reducing temporary staff continues. The other set of reasons is more not necessarily financial, but more to do with culture and cohesiveness of the units, as well as quality of care, right? So it is a very difficult situation for nurse leaders, HR leaders, when a travel, ICU or OR nurse is getting paid a lot more than the nurse right next to them, who's a permanent nurse. That does create sort of tensions on units. And so, and then in addition, there is a strong desire to have an extremely robust permanent or core workforce already in place, to ensure that the quality of care is being delivered on a consistent basis.
Great point. Okay, let's move into some data that and tips that nurses have shared with us. Now, I want to stress a couple of things as we dive into this data. So we do a very, very extensive study with nurses in Q1 of every year. So we did one in Q1 of 2023. We're preparing that survey and that study for Q1 of 2024. The data that you're seeing is not from that large study. This is from a much smaller survey that we sent out to nurses, but we did feel like it was important to share the data with you and share some of the insights with you, even though it's going to be far less statistically significant than data you're going to get from us in a few months, when we have several thousand nurses respond to these survey questions. So just keep that in mind, but we did feel it was important to share the data with you that these nurses are sharing with us. Okay, so this was gathered in October, so not very long ago. And let's talk through, why nurses said they become nurses. So most of them wanted to help people. That's something that I think is great to hear. And then the second was they recognized there was a huge volume of employment opportunities, that there was an opportunity to have employers compete for them. And there's certainly, they recognize that they're a valued resource. Those are, I think, very logical reasons, but it was interesting, I think, to hear the nurses actually address that, kind of what we've all known as to why people become nurses. Those don't surprise me at all, Amon. Do they surprise you?
Not at all. I mean, I'm glad that the majority are doing it to help people.
You're glad people want to help people? Yeah.
Which is good. But then, yeah, the job security is definitely a factor, especially just given the broader macroeconomic climate. I think Americans going into professions that have a bit more stability and more opportunities is an important consideration.
Yeah, really interesting. And then what matters most to them? So low nurse to patient ratio was a very important aspect of their job satisfaction. Compensation's obviously important, and then early career advancement, which we've talked about. The ratio thing's tough given the shortage. Like, this is sort of inherent in the problem. That ratio becomes difficult when you don't have enough nurses on staff. Anything you want to highlight from this slide, Iman?
No, I mean, we continue to see the same themes, right? Nurse to patient ratios, compensation, career advancement opportunities, flexible. It's not mentioned in the slide, but we know flexible scheduling is up there in the top 5 as well. And so we are definitely seeing that hospitals and health systems that are addressing each of these areas are hiring more and retaining more. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And then why do they stay specifically? Now, you'll notice that the data points here add up to more than 100. We asked them to select multiple things, so it could. Safe and supportive work environment and feeling valued by their colleagues and boss. Again, this is not exclusive to nursing. If you were to do a survey of most workplaces, these would probably be among the reasons people feel like they stay. But this does speak to the importance of internal culture. And we talked to a lot of hospital execs about the ways they're trying to improve and manage the culture within their workplace. And there are some really cool ideas that they've taken advantage of and are using. So I think it's hospital executives being really creative with culture and making sure people are feeling valued. Are you seeing that as well, Aman?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the tactics they're implementing to tackle some of this is on the second one, feeling valued by their colleagues and bosses, just more and more um, development programs for nursing leaders and nurse managers. That's more sort of more formal training around how to be a great manager, which are needed in every industry, but certainly including nursing. And then the second area around a safe environment, more and more sort of focus on this, just because we did see an increase of workplace violence and so on over the last few years. And so, those tactics range from increasing security personnel all the way to training and how to handle some of these difficult situations. So those are definitely areas that we see hospital leaders focusing on.
Great. And then what would drive someone to relocate is the next data point here. And this is one I think that there's a misconception on it. And then maybe it's going away, that misconception, but I think there was a misconception for a long time that nurses weren't willing to relocate. They are, and they've told us what what would drive them to do so. And most of the time it's higher compensation, no surprise, but a pretty large number said improved quality of life. So things like a shorter commute, things like lower cost of living could cause them to relocate to an entirely different area of the country or the state they're in, which doesn't surprise us. We're seeing more willingness from nurses to relocate than ever before, it seems, which is, I think, great for mobility around, addressing the shortage that we're seeing.
Sure, just to share a
Um,
little bit more
yeah, go
data.
ahead. Go ahead.
Go back. Just to
Yeah, yeah.
share a little bit more deep data from our platform on this. 40% of the roles on our platform end up getting filled by nurses who are relocating from a different state. And so, to your point, McKay, there is considerable amount of relocation happening in the permanent nurse labor market. So this phenomenon is not just restricted to just travel. Of course, travel nurses are moving around, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
permanent nurses are moving around as well. A lot of the sort of migration patterns that we see in our marketplace, just based on the enormous amount of data that we're looking at, in terms of feeder markets and where they're moving to, and anyway, and so on, it does very much reflect the rest of the U.S. population. That we are seeing a lot of movement into Texas, into Florida. We're seeing movement out of New York, out of California. We are seeing some U.S. cities don't get the benefit of relocation at all. I think have a lot of empathy for the cities in the Midwest that aren't able to attract as many nurses wanting to move into those cities. So there's definitely there's definitely quite a lot of movement here. It does vary not just by state, but even by specific city. And then there's regardless of the overall trends, there remains a top 10 most popular cities to move to that is pretty consistent, right? So New York is still very popular. Dallas, Austin, Houston is very popular. The cities in Florida are very popular to move into, and so really that the teams that are really taking advantage of this are putting together very strong relocation packages, including relocation assistance, and they are also ensuring that their talent acquisition teams and their nursing leaders are not biasing against talent that is living further away because of this opportunity for relocation.
That's great. Yeah, it's not going away. I love that takeaway. And then what are the deal breakers for nurses? Like what's going to cause them to look around and leave? It's the exact inverse of what causes them to stay, which is an unsafe or unpleasant working environment, low compensation, and then a poor work-life balance. And unsafe, unpleasant is interesting. Like you mentioned, we've seen an increase in our data around like violence. That also is just like rudeness. There's a lot of categories and subcategories under that. And then the poor work-life balance, I think, is everything from flexible scheduling to commute to cost of living. There's a lot of things inherent in the poor work-life balance as well. And it's going to vary generationally, I would say, in terms of what different generations see as a reasonable work-life balance across the workforce. Would you agree with that, Amon? Anything you want to highlight from this slide?
Yeah. Aaron asked a question, are these, are some of these more important than compensation and benefits? Like at the end of the day, there is definitely a ranking, right?
Yeah.
Around what matters most. We see the rankings towards the top, if we have to summarize, right, is career advancement opportunities, flexible scheduling, and anything to do with compensation and benefits. Tackling those three large areas or huge themes tend to lead to strong hiring and retention. Now, then there's a second category of themes, the work environment, the patient nurse to patient ratio, that are tackled as well. Now, we've seen what we're seeing is that most leaders, or most teams are sort of doing the divide and conquer approach, right? At the end of the day, there's some highly competent, very impressive nursing leaders and very impressive and highly competent HR leaders. And so between those two teams, they're sort of tackling these major themes.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic in terms of how much these matter relative to compensation and benefits. And Justin asked an interesting question. He said a couple slides ago, you mentioned 96% of hospital execs are prioritizing permanent nurses over temporary. How do you see this impacting the temporary travel market in the near term? And do nurses feel the same way about being permanent nurses versus temporary? So a couple questions there, but first, impacting the travel and temporary market in the near term, and do nurses like this shift towards permanent?
Yeah, so just to share a few like statistics. Before COVID, the use of temporary labor in nursing, just national average, was around 5 to 6%. So 5 to 6% of roles, of nurses, so on, we're in sort of this temporary bucket. Throughout COVID, that increased to closer to 9 to 11%, which is a pretty sizable increase. It's like a doubling, right? We're now seeing it come down to actually closer to 7 to 8% average. So it's not going back to the baseline that it was before COVID, but it is lower than what it was during COVID. So I think there has been like a permanent, excuse me, excuse me. There has been a sort of a resetting of what's normal. It's no longer 5%. It's going to be high. It's higher going forward, like 7 to 8%. But unless there's a pandemic or other, crazy, intense situations like that, it's probably not going to go up to 9 to 10% without like a dramatic event happening. As far as nurses, the way the nurse perspective on this, at the end of the day, and this has always been our thesis as well, nurses over a 30-40 year career is at most going to spend maybe 1 or 2 years of their careers as temporary workers. And they are like, they're like myself, McKay, many of us on the call. They have homes, they have kids, there's school to consider, so on. They do spend the majority of their career as permanent workers. And so the idea of being a travel nurse is a temporary thing that you do for 1 or 2 years. It's not, you don't spend 30 years of your career as a travel nurse or temporary worker because you need more stability.
Yeah, you can't do that forever in most cases, right? As I think what your point is. Yeah, it's a great point. Okay, let's shift gears just quickly to the nurses and what's important to them in the hiring process specifically. So I think these are really interesting data points. So 25% of nurses stated they'd be unlikely to complete an application prior to speaking with a hiring manager, which I think is really an interesting behavior. And then if we go down to resumes, this highlights the generative AI functionality we talked about. Like, resumes are a barrier right now to opportunity for nurses, and that's a big deal. Which again, I think underscores the importance of the generative AI functionality that we talked about at the outset of the webinar. The other one that's kind of interesting here is in the initial phone screen. Like, what do they want to hear about? They want to hear about some unique attributes of the hospital, and then there's patient to staff ratios showing up again, and of course salary and bonus and things. But the hiring process is really, really important here, and it gives them a really good sense, I think, of the efficiency of the hospital itself based on the efficiency of the hiring process. But anything you want to highlight here, any comments you want to make, just maybe about the resumes or the application or the phone screen?
Sure. So I think that the theme here is that speed and competition are very important factors that have to be considered and should honestly drive a lot of the decision making and how to modify, change, update the hiring process. We are seeing more and more hiring processes become increasingly more and more candidate centric or nurse centric. So doing what's best for the candidate or the nurse, not necessarily what's the easiest for the teams internally. And so that's sort of like why we're seeing some of this phenomenon. And of course, just the intense competition for this talent. On the speed piece, I mean, there is just an increase because of the nurses just, they want more information and they want to interact with humans as quickly as possible, right? And so any barrier to that, like needing an application to talk to anyone or um, needing to submit a full-blown resume before scheduling any interview or um, needing to
Or needing
wait
a
on
reference early in the process, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly, needing a reference or needing to or wait or even just waiting for to go move on to the next step and not having clarity on what the next steps are. All of these are sort of barriers in the hiring process, and the teams that are sort of breaking down each and every one of these barriers are absolutely hiring more, and they're driving a stronger candidate experience, and it creates an enormously positive first impression of the health system. Because we survey nurses as well. They say, "Hey, because I got hired so fast, and I had such a great experience during the hiring process, this must be how the rest of the health system is operating," right? Whether that's true or not is sort of a side thing, but it's creating an extremely positive first impression.
yeah. Well, you make the point about speed. This is the next slide. Like the offers extended, only 7% of nurses say they would wait more than a week for an offer. They expect a third, which is a crazy high percentage, expect an offer within 48 hours. So speed is really dramatic. And we've done other data, and I don't know if it's in this deck, but have other data that indicates like even if a second offer is slightly more money, there's probably limits to what I'm about to say, of course. But nurses want to go with the first hospital to offer them. So if you are able to move quickly, that gives you a huge leg up in the process. And as you said, impacts even retention down the road because it's just such a great first impression that it kind of welds that nurse to your hospital for potentially a longer amount of time. Anything else you want to say on speed or any of these other hiring process components here? I thought the reference thing was really interesting as well. Like it's just when you ask for that could be a barrier in the process for a nurse.
Yeah. So a couple of sort of more tactical things on the hiring manager piece. 65% of nurses preferring a virtual interview. Look, we saw when COVID happened, all the hiring processes had to move virtual. After COVID, there was sometimes there was like a internal push, oftentimes from the nursing managers, to go back to on sites and interviewing in person and so on.
Mm-hmm.
If that's an option, great, but it cannot be can no longer be a requirement. Like we're in a new world now where nurses expect for the whole process to be virtual and to do video interviews, phone calls, not necessarily show up in person and do on sites. Back to the earlier relocation point, I mean, an emphasis on sites will also limit the ability to hire nurses that are from out of state. On the reference piece, what we're seeing that handle, because to your point, McKay, references can't be a barrier to proceeding through the hiring process, is that we're seeing many health systems still send out offers, written offers, but they are contingent on references. So you can review an offer, you can get an offer, and so on, but there's an understanding there, and it's written formally that, hey, we can't actually fully start until all your references are done. So the hospital has the right to withdraw that offer if the references turn out to be not good. So again, the main reason hospitals are doing this is just because of the intense competition. If your competitor down the street is sending out offers contingent on references, yet you're requiring references, I mean, you've just delayed your process by another week in some cases. So it really is, it just really speaks to the importance and emphasis on speed.
Love it. So let's dive into the speed a little bit more here for the next 5 minutes or so, as we talk a little bit about Incredible Health. So Hospitals are using our custom matching technology to hire permanent nurses in less than 20 days. So that speeds up the process dramatically from where most hospitals and health systems are, which is over 90 days. And there's some markets, I was looking at data 2 days ago, where we're helping hospitals hire in 14 days. Like, this really speeds up the process. And based on the nurse feedback that we just looked at, that is maybe the most important thing during the hiring process itself, is just speed. And I think it's a huge benefit of Incredible Health, is the speed with which we can help connect hospitals and nurses. And we see it every day across our platform, on both the nurse side and the hospital side. But anything you want to highlight here around the speed that we see from our platform and how that impacts hospitals and health systems?
Sure. We've looked at this data in every single location and city where we operate. And even and we're often working with many health systems in a certain location, right? So look, we can take the Dallas market, New York market, the Bay Area, Miami, whatever it is. Oftentimes there's a hospital or a health system there that has a huge brand, and they're very dependent on that brand. There's also another health system that just, they're just offering the top wages in that market, or at the top of the bracket when it comes to salaries. And then we have a health system that's just operating with faster speed in the hiring process. Like in every single city, it is the health system that is operating with the most speed that hires the most.
Mm.
And hey, Carrie, how's it going? Carrie Boyson at Baylor Scott and White just shared in the chat, so loves our partnership with Incredible Health. That is a system that has like progressively prioritized candidate-centric experiences and speed. And they are able to very consistently beat their competition just based on speed.
Yep.
And that's not to say, I'm not trying to say brand doesn't matter and wages don't matter. Wages don't matter. Of course, those matter as well. And the more you're doing there, of course, it's going to help. But it is very difficult to successfully hire if you don't have the speed, and
Yeah.
you're only dependent on high salaries and brand.
Yep. Speed matters. You can see some of the logos on your screen there of hospitals and health systems we work with, and Baylor Scott and White. Thanks for jumping on. That's great.
Yeah. So we work with over 800 hospitals and health systems across the country. And so that includes a whole range of geographies. It includes acute care. Of course, the majority are acute care hospitals, but it includes academic medical centers. It includes community hospitals, so magnet hospitals, non-magnet hospitals. So at this point, we've done the full gamut and are able to help those teams drive success, regardless of the type of hospital.
And the question kind of is, what do we do and how do we do that, right? In a real way, employers are kind of applying to the candidates instead of the other way around. And that's done with, you saw the generative AI functionality, matching algorithms, proprietary screening, and data analytics. It's a really, really incredible way for hospitals and nurses to match and find each other more rapidly, which helps everyone in the process. It fills your team faster, and it of course impacts nurses positively when they can get an offer more quickly. The most frustrating part of the job search for nurses, and really anybody, is just how long it takes, to your point. But anything else you want to mention about the process and how we do it and what we do?
No, I mean, I think you've covered it. Sort of the way we broke into this market is with that changing the paradigm, right? Where the employers are applying to the talent instead of waiting for the talent to apply to the employers. That is something that absolutely resonates with nurses. You'll see that we have thousands of 5-star reviews across Google, Facebook, the App Store, and nurses often describe this as the best job search experience of their careers. And they really do value that sort of the reverse process that we're doing here. And it's faster, it's more efficient. Nurses are often working, they're overworking, frankly, and so they want speed.
Yep, they want speed, and this is the statistic I was sharing earlier that is in this slide deck. They really, really want to receive that offer quickly, and are going to accept that first offer in many cases, even when the second or third offer has higher compensation. And we can't stress enough the importance of speed with this whole process. Now, there's obviously limits to that, as I said before, right? But the speed really does matter dramatically. And I think the speed here, this is just this is a specific hospital that is anonymized. We didn't use their logo here, but you can see the way that the actual process is sped up from their normal process. So their conventional hiring model versus how they succeed when they're using Incredible Health. And you can see precisely where those time gains are most important. And then, of course, the money savings when a process speeds up like this are really dramatic. The cost savings are really substantial and I think important here to cover. So any highlights here? Because obviously we talk about time to source a bit, but even just the candidate sourcing to phone screen, the time is cut in half in most cases as well for both the nurses and the hospitals.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, ultimately, this is a cost-saving product.
Yep.
And by hiring permanent nurses faster, you can dramatically offset the temporary labor costs. Because instead of filling the roles with travel nurses or doing the work with travel nurses, you're doing it with permanent workers. Essentially, there is tons of pressure to keep premium labor, to reduce premium labor, keep it at a lower amount. And so the partnership more than pays for itself within days. And for our average cost savings for each hospital we work with is at least 5 million a year. In many cases, it's 10 million and more per year that we're saving the health system by ensuring that money is not spent not spent on travel nurses.
That's great and a big deal. The question we often get is, well, gosh, if you're hiring so quickly, surely that has a negative impact on retention. Not true. Like we see 15% higher nurse retention at 1 year when nurses are hired via Incredible Health through any other source. And so they are actually going to stay longer if they have a great, quick, efficient process at the beginning of the hiring process. So just because the hiring process is efficient at the start does not mean that they're going to leave faster. And I think that's a common misconception. And we're even seeing, I think, too, as well, like talking to the team that works so closely with our hospitals, like in many cases, this is much higher. And as we start to track this over multiple years, the data even looks more encouraging. Anything you want to mention about retention before we conclude?
Yeah, as we're wrapping up here, the reason that the retention rate is sort of higher when nurses are hired through Incredible Health, there's two reasons. One, it was a very well thought out job search, so they're not taking anything they can get. They're being really thoughtful about what their preferences are, and often interviewing with multiple hospitals before selecting your hospital. And then the other thing is, like, our nurse network does skew a little bit more experienced. And so more experienced nurses tend to have better retention than those that are at the very beginning of their careers. And so, yeah, 50% of our hospitals do use us for new graduates as well. But it's the experienced nurses that are really helping the retention piece.
That's great. We've taken a lot of questions throughout, but there's a couple here. One I'll address to you directly. If hospitals want to work with Incredible Health, what's the best way for them to engage with us? What's the process look like from start to finish? And I just say that the best way to get in touch with us is probably this email address, or you can email us directly. But anything you want to highlight just about the process we usually follow to, see if it's a fit for the hospital before they work with us?
Sure. Also, our colleague Danny has shared a link as well in the chat. If anyone's interested in learning more, you can sign up for a demo too. And so, yeah, it's a very customized process. We do every health system is slightly different, has slightly different needs. And so our team does engage in a consultative way about what it is that your team needs. And walks through, like, understanding your problems and your specific challenges. The webinar is also recorded. And so a member of our team will be in touch with the recording too. And so please feel free to get in touch anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you for jumping on, everybody. We know your December is really busy. We know things get crazy this time of year, so we appreciate you taking the time. We hope this was valuable. We'll make this presentation and the recording available to you. And then if you're interested, please click on the link that Danny just shared, and feel free to fill out that form. We'll also have people from the team reaching out. Any final thoughts here on the call today, man, from you and your seat kind of overseeing all this data?
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're all excited for 2024. I mean, I think the focus and attention on the nursing workforce across the board, from media, from hospital leaders, from technology companies, and so on, is exciting to see. Certainly, there's more and more attention on this workforce than before COVID, and so that's an opportunity for all of us to continue to drive change and drive improvements and make their hiring experiences better and make their employee experiences better, now that we have the attention and the focus. So I hope everybody's excited for 2024 and can use some of this data and information to continue informing your strategies and your tactics.
Awesome. Thank you for jumping on, everybody. We really appreciate it, and have a fantastic rest of December, and happy holidays.